Good afternoon, everyone. I am Garbo Hearn, Director of Hearn Fine Art, and excited to be here to welcome you to the Zoom virtual presentation of Louise Mandumbwa as it relates to Home Wherever the Soul Connects, which is a father-daughter exhibition of paintings, drawings, and prints by Crawford Mandumbwa and Louise Mandumbwa. And it has been such an exciting month to have the work there and to have the people come and walk through and be excited about the work they've seen. And I want just to say a few words about Louise. I met Louise about 4 or 5 years ago at a Pulaski Tech event, and she was there painting, and then from there we have done exhibitions, projects, and I've gotten to know Louise, and she is just like another member of my family, but I'm more encouraged about her spirit and the understanding that she is emerging and developing into the artist she wants to be as she continues her education. And it's been a pleasure to have this exhibit and get to know her father, Crawford Mandumbwa, because you can see that the apple didn't fall very far from the tree in terms of the creative spirit and interest. So we're glad to have you all here today and excited to hear Louise's presentation. So welcome, Louise.
All right, thank you very much for the warm words, the warm welcome. And for those of you that are joining us either in this Zoom directly or over Facebook, thank you for your time. I got to speak a little bit about my practice in the initial talk that we had with the joint artist conversation. And so I thought for my presentation, I'd get into some of the specifics around the mediums that I work with in a general sense, but then also some of the work that was developed for this particular body of work and exhibition, Home Wherever the Soul Connects. So to kind of get right into who I am and where I'm from, my name is Louise Kenga Lorato Mandumbwa, and I am a visual artist. I was born and raised in Francistown, Botswana. That is home for me, but I've also been fortunate enough to spend the last 5.5 years here in Central Arkansas, and would think of myself as something of an honorary Arkansan. My background is a little bit in graphic design. I got an associate's from the University of Arkansas at Pulaski Tech, and then moved over to the University of Central Arkansas, where I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts qualification with an emphasis in painting. And I think that graphic quality in my work has remained over the years. That interest in really having very clean compositions has remained in my work, and also speaks to some of the mediums that I work with. And so to kind of locate where this exhibition is in the lineage of shows that I've been fortunate enough to have and be a part of over the last several years, this is my first two-person exhibition. My very first exhibition was here in Hearn Fine Art and was titled With Feeling. And I've been fortunate enough to have some type of exhibition or showing of my work almost every year consecutively since 2017. So they were on Being and Becoming, You Are Not Your Own, Your Name Is Not Your Own, the senior exhibition or capstone exhibition that was put together at the University of Central Arkansas just before I graduated, and now Home Wherever the Soul Connects. And I think the through line with all of those different bodies of work is that I am very invested and interested in people, not only narratives and their stories, but thinking about community and a sense of community and how we exist in relation to community. And so even though I got my qualification in painting, something that has been important to me as well has been the exploration of different mediums. So I work primarily as a painter, but I am also a printmaker and a draftsman. That is to say that I draw. And I really got to sit and think not only during the execution of this exhibition, but even before, when I was developing work for my capstone, about the different mediums that I work in. I think the exciting thing about being an emerging artist is the opportunity that exists to explore and to have play, and looking forward to pursuing further education. I was thinking about which medium I would maybe settle into or focus on. And part of that internal dialogue was really thinking about the ways in which each of those mediums has something really valuable that I'm able to hold on to. So I think there's something really beautiful about the simplicity of just paper and pencil or charcoal and graphite, the texture of paper as you continue to build work on it, and thinking about the simplicity of just what you can do with what you have access to. And so I think there's a certain level of detail and specificity I'm really able to engage in with the works that I do that are drawings. And then thinking about incorporation of color and how painting exists in my life, and how what I feel like I really get to engage in is light, and thinking about how light affects not only a space, but very specifically how it plays on the skin and brings out more texture. And so that's something that is valuable in my mind that exists there. And printmaking, maybe a little bit unlike the other two, is the medium where I have the least control, where there is more experimenting that happens, and where I really get to play with abstraction and think about not necessarily the final image, but the process through which the images are made. And something that I really picked up on and held on to earlier this year was a conversation with a fellow artist, a wonderful artist, Celine Green, who works completely different than I do, also a painter, but more abstract. And the commentary that we'd had about our work was our interest, as much as it is about people, was about what those works could facilitate. And rather than thinking of our works as simply paintings or drawings or portraits, we thought of our work as objects of facilitation and facilitating conversation. In many ways, it feels like the magic that I feel happens in my work happens not in the making, but really in having conversation around the work, and also thinking about not only the individuals, but their stories and how to tell those stories. And in my mind, in addition to being an artist and a storyteller, being a good steward of those stories. And so I try to depict the individuals that I get the pleasure of engaging with a level of dignity and clarity. And I've been truly privileged to, in this show, get to represent so many people that I know so well, people that have truly brought so much value to my life. So to get into something that I was able to think about very specifically with this show, process and language in my practice. I think different people have different approaches to how they get to really engage with work. And on my end, I often think about what it is I'm intending to communicate. And it's only when I've established the exact language that I have in mind, it's only when I've really scratched the surface of what it is that I'm hoping to communicate that I arrive at a process that allows me to execute that. And so with some of the works in the show that were created a little bit later in the production process, what I was thinking of was impressions and first impressions and interacting with people, and then thinking in a very literal line with impressions, thinking about printmaking and how that is the literal impressions that you put on a paper, and arriving at a few different processes that I've been able to document, and I hope I can share with you now, because they are a little bit harder to visualize if you are not well-versed or really familiar with printmaking. So blind embossing is something that I've gotten to tie into my work, specifically with the works on paper that are drawings. And it is running a piece of paper through a printing press with a matrix to leave an impression in the paper. There's a few different ways that you can do it. I did it both with lino, which is a rubbery material that you can carve into. It's quite physical, or by really meticulously cutting out pieces of mat board to leave shapes. And so for some of the pieces that I've worked with and with the different mediums that I work with, I also think about very specifically how I can be a better painter because I am a printmaker, and how to be a better printmaker because I'm a painter, and how to be a better draftsman because of both. And so allowing that layering in my mind allows for a little more complexity. And as I said earlier, being an emerging artist, there's a level of play that I'm really getting to value and engage with currently in my practice. So there are a few different pieces, but one in particular that I can speak of is Blessing. And what I was thinking of in part was the ways in which I could build a visual language that was very specific to myself and my practice, to be able to signify or really celebrate immigrants in my work. Because many of the people that I get to make work of are people that are directly immigrants, but not always. I also get to make pieces of people that I've met here who might not have an immigrant experience at all. And so what I arrived at is a symbol that you can see in the slide that's being shared on the right of the image, the lower right. And it's a series of symbols that represent an overlap. So again, just thinking of language first, I was thinking about liminality and the experience of the immigrant so often being one of being in a cultural in between. And with that in mind, and my graphic background as well, I got the word diasporian and overlapped it on itself. And that is what created those very specific shapes that kind of ticker tape up through the image. In the top left corner, you can also see some forms that are there. And what I was thinking of in addition were maps. I had someone come in and see the show, and their remark was, "It looks like you draw a lot of people. Have you ever made work that is not of people?" And I laughed a little bit because the answer is yes. I spent several months thinking about what would be left in my work if I were to take away the people. And the answer was textiles and maps and little vignettes of information and through lines that connect the pieces to the other things in the space. And so with that in mind, in the top left corner, there is a non-specific map that really points to the idea of a topographical map without being very specific, because experiences are often so nuanced and not always attached to one specific place. And in my experience, it can be a little bit reductive to ask someone where they're from and then expect only one answer, when the people that we spend time with and interact with shape our lives, and the people that we get to see, even if it's in passing, impact our lives in ways that can be truly meaningful. And so with that in mind, I'm really thinking about equipping an audience with language that would allow us to have conversations that are meaningful. My father and I, who's the other artist in this two-person exhibition, were able to put together a list of non-specific terms or non-exhaustive list of terms to be able to really engage in conversation about the people that the work is about. The terms that we selected range a little bit from the non-English translations to titles of works, or on my end, the translations of individuals' names in English and where they are from, as well as the phonetic pronunciation. And then very specifically, the definition of the word diasporian, which is a word that we had generated a definition for. It doesn't exist in the dictionary, unfortunately, but if you can see the screen, you can see that it describes a person in the diaspora, an immigrant making a life for themselves in a place different from their place of birth or upbringing, and navigating a cultural multiplicity. And I think that last bit of navigating a cultural multiplicity is where I see my practice really continuing to progress and follow, because I really am interested in nuance in how stories are told, and little details that allow that story to be told in a way that allows for conversation and also understanding and empathy. Every iteration of my artist statement over the years has always involved the word Ubuntu, which is the idea that our lives are inextricably connected. And the thing that allows us most humanity, the thing that distinguishes us from other species and makes us human, isn't our intellect, but rather our ability to really empathize and connect with the people around us. So it is the people around us that make us human. And that has always been, I think, a central point of my philosophy as an artist. And it informs so much of how I continue to make. So to just skip through and speak perhaps about how that making and how that thought process affects how I think of images, there's a piece that I had the opportunity to speak about a little earlier, which is of my father. I have a bit of a thought process when it comes to representing individuals that are still alive. And it's tying into something that's a little traditional that we learned in school, which is called non-finito. It's little moments of unfinished in artwork that allow, in my mind, this individual to exist beyond that moment. Stylistically, it's something that developed from working paintings and working them some more, and often overworking them. And then several hours later, realizing that there had been a sweet spot that I had passed and the work was now a little overdone. And so stylistically, I enjoy having these little moments of openness in a painting that in my mind allow this individual to change, because we do change as people moment to moment. And so rather than fixing an individual specifically as they are in that moment in time, I try to allow these little moments of blankness or qualities of unfinished seep through the overall work, so that you have some inkling that this person may change. I particularly like trying to have moments of really clean clarity in the image. I enjoy painting ears. And then also having those juxtaposed with areas where you can really see the paint brushes or the passages of color coming apart. You can see the shapes that make up the whole. And it's starting to lean a little bit more towards abstraction, and something that I hope to be able to really look at further in my practice. I think something else that people who have seen my work previously might attest to is the gaze being an important part of the work, and having works in conversation. The first show that I got to put together in 2017 was portraits again, but all of them with very direct outward looking gazes. And being in the room with all of those works around me, I found that it was a little more intimidating than I had thought it would be. There was such intention on my part in terms of allowing a person to engage with the individual that I didn't realize that a room full of faces like that might be a little bit hard to engage with. And so what I've done instead in this exhibition, I've tried to be very intentional about making the works feel like they're in conversation and how I have posed them. I favor a 3/4 pose, if you will, but also think about how the gaze can really allow you to think about who gets to be seen. And so in these 3 pieces that you can see on your screen physically in the room behind me, they are placed exactly the same, with 2 inward looking gazes and 1 individual looking out at you. And the different professions of the individuals that are represented now are a retiree, a medical student, and a security guard. And even though I do enjoy getting to engage with very ordinary individuals, very everyday people that populate my reality, the middle composition, the piece of Jacob, is the piece that I thought would be really impactful to allow for an outward gaze, really thinking about who gets to be seen and who isn't given a second glance, and how a security guard at a high school might be someone that is often overlooked or often not given a second glance, and really allowing in these different pieces for his portrait to be the one that is the most, in my mind, arresting and engaging, and the one that people really get to ask questions about, and how that can really allow for someone to be humanized. Another example is the pieces Miss Brown and Dinah, or The Way Back. These 2 wonderful individuals are parallels in my mind. The piece on the right is of my father's great aunt, Dinah, and she's the family historian and very much my grandmother and someone that I care for. And on the left is a piece of someone here in Arkansas who is a volunteer and much beloved member of the Hearn Fine Art family, someone that I got to really resonate with and connect with when I interned here in 2017. And both of these women, I think, occupy a very similar space in my life. They're people that I truly appreciate and I've gotten to learn so much from. And I wanted to, even though they are on opposite ends of the world, put them in conversation. And I think I will allow for questions soon, but something that I really want to keep touching on is the importance of conversation and how art can really facilitate dialogue and facilitate conversation between not only individuals, but also people on different ends of the world and lived experiences. So I hope I haven't been too quick going through the presentation, but I would love to have conversation and see if there are any questions that might be had about the work.
I'll ask the question. Can you hear me,
Yes.
Louise?
Yes, I can.
Hi, this is Maria, and I'm gonna tell you, I love your work. You know, I'm a fan of your work. And I was just looking at one of your paintings, one I have here in the house, and I think it's the thing that catches me on your work, that is, you know, actual facial features. What keeps coming back to me is this the intensity of the woman, and I can't remember the name of the piece, but in all your work, I see the same thing. For some way, you're able to capture and grab some intense moment in a person's life. So first question is, do you actually, I know you use models. You're actually, some of your work is focused on models. Is all your work focused? Do you have a model for all of your human or facial images? And second of all, where does this come from? How do you transfer that to the art? Because when I look at the painting I have, the lady's eyes are, it's obvious that she has gone through something, this intense look that she has, and for you to capture those feelings, I think that's what keeps me always wanting to look at your work. So if you can elaborate on how you are able to do that.
All right, first off, thank you for your question, Ms. Maria. I know the piece that you're speaking of, it's Rendele. And to answer your first question, I do always have a real person that I am referencing. It's usually someone that I photographed myself. I think initially some of my pieces, when I was just starting out, I'd find images that I was really arrested by, and I would get in touch with the photographer and get permission. I think there's 3 or 4 pieces in my earlier works where that was the case. And I'm actually very intentional now about only referencing images that I've photographed myself, because it is so important that I get to spend time with the person and get a sense of them. And I think as someone who is a visual artist, there's a bit of a trap that you can fall into about just looking on the surface and seeing someone's features and thinking, oh, this person has a great profile. It would be incredible to make a piece of them. They would make a great piece of art. And I think that intentionality that you're speaking of, and the intensity and conveying emotion is in part because I do make from a very internal place. It is a very emotive process for me, and I really do take the images that I make seriously, in the sense that I view it as being a steward of this person's story, because even though that person isn't always in the room with the work, I have the opportunity to represent this person and answer questions that people have about who this person is and where they're from and what they're about and what the light in their eyes is about. And so I try to make without ego, if I can put it that way. I hear that there's an idea that every artwork that a portrait artists make is to some degree a self-portrait. And I don't know that I fully believe that, but I think I am always intently looking at people, and I study people. I think also, to speak a little bit more formally about the work, I'm someone who is the daughter of immigrants. Both of my parents are expats from Zambia to Botswana, and I am an immigrant here in the US myself. And I've always felt most at home in the company of people that I care for. And I think that speaks a little bit to the lack of physical space in the work. You know, people think that the individuals are floating, and it's a little bit more because I am disinvested in physical spaces. A room just feels like a room to me, and a space just feels like a space, but I really feel like I engage with people, and that's what lights me up, and that's what I try to focus on in my work. I don't know if I've answered the question adequately, or if there's maybe an aspect of it that you want more specific answer to, but thank you for your question.
Oh, no, you hit it right on the head. And I just, again, just want to let you know that I am a true fan. And it was exciting to see that your dad was an artist too. So I'm enjoying hearing the story. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Louise, I have a question.
Yes.
As you continue to engage and learn through life, and your intent is to continue your education, tell me, what do you see in your future once that's accomplished?
Do you mean in how my work might change, or what might happen with just my practice in general?
Maybe a little of both. I mean, I just want to see what your future aspirations are.
Okay, so I have the pleasure of having 2 educators for parents, and have an immense respect for educators, but don't necessarily envision that for myself in a literal sense. I would love so much to be a facilitator. and someone that could act as a resource point for young artists that are really invested and interested in the arts. And I think something that happens in the developing world and in specific communities is that if people have never seen what it can potentially look like to be an artist, they're not always as encouraging or as supportive as they could be of young artists who have immense potential and are incredibly talented. And I think on my end, I had the privilege and pleasure, that first image of me and my father at a show, that was my introduction to the arts. And so I think that there's so few people that have that opportunity, and I would love part of my practice to be just facilitating and supporting young artists. I think I am someone who has benefited greatly from having a support system here in the US of educators, people at my university that were willing to avail themselves and answer questions, to Ms. Hearn and her team here at Hearn Fine Art, being able to let me know where my blind spots were in terms of my practice and what needed to happen for growth. And I'd love so, so much to be able to do that for other people. And then in terms of how I see my work changing, I think in scale, and it has changed in scale over time. Over the last several years, it's gotten fairly large, from pieces that were initially almost all 16 by 20 to pieces that are now 4 foot by 5 foot in some cases. And I think I'm building towards potentially having work that can exist in spaces. And I mean, in the sense of public artwork and being able to do that type of work and have work in a community. Because as much as I love being able to be in a space like this and have conversation about the work, I think it would be even more engaging and exciting to have this work in a community that can really take ownership of it and be able to feel proud that piece is there. So I'm hoping that I can work towards that, and definitely hoping towards being able to pursue my education further and get a master's degree.
Louise, hey, this is Anna. Um, so you received your formal training thus far, you know, in the American South. And I know you've done some fellowships and things in like New York, but you know, you spent a lot of time in the South. How have your experiences, just as an immigrant, a Black woman, an African woman, you know, in the South, how has that informed your work?
You know, I think it's been.
I guess also like current events, just being Black in this country.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, I think that's something that I reflect on occasionally, because there are so many Black and brown bodies that were brought here against their will, that have thrived in this space and have navigated this space. And I, as an immigrant, voluntarily came here several years after that, decades, centuries after that initial incident of Black and brown bodies being brought here through the slave trade. And so I think what has been interesting is navigating my identity. I came here at 18 and had never understood what it meant to really feel different or be in a minority, because I came from a majority Black country, and being in a space where the color of your skin had no bearing really, or very little bearing on your chances of getting positions or opportunities, to it being a factor, was interesting. So being in this space, I think I'm quite fortunate in that I haven't had overtly negative experiences, that I've still been able to find a support system and enjoy so much of my time here in the US. But I think also to think about the last 2 years and how tumultuous they have been, and even the years before that. It's really jarring at times to realize how something that is completely out of my control is affecting my life, and how people are receiving me and receiving my work in turn. And so I think maybe part of that is why I am as intentional as I am about representing people that are from where I am from, and in the communities that I get to be a part of, and representing them with what I perceive to be as much dignity as I can give them, and trying to represent them in a way that I feel is multifaceted and nuanced, as opposed to flattening them to anything. I really try to, I think even having a singular image or a single figure in an artwork is for me allowing that person to be taken as an individual on their own merits. And I would hope that that's how we all get to be seen as individuals on our own merits who are in turn complicated and dynamic and worth taking a second look at. So I think that's been interesting. And then also getting to travel very briefly, albeit to other parts of the country, realizing that the perceptions that people have in this country of other parts of the country is interesting because people will say, oh, you're based where? That seems kind of strange. But then also seeing things that maybe don't mirror the progressive point of view that they think exists in a really holistic way in those spaces as well. So I think I try to really appreciate every situation for what it is. And again, just try and absorb and take in individuals and moments for what they are on their own merit and not make assumptions.
Thank you. Everyone is allowed to unmute and ask questions. If you have questions, please.
Louise, this is Lindy. And
Hello, Miss Lindy.
I don't know enough to ask a question, but I just am blown away by your maturity. You are such an artist. You're not just a visual artist. You're a verbal artist. Your command and expression of the English language just absolutely is a total flower in bloom. I'm so honored to know you.
Thank you very, very much for your kind words. Thank you, Miss Lindy.
Well, I will come back because unless I missed it, Louise, did you tell us when you started down your art journey? Did with your dad being an artist, and I hear he's on the line too. Did you pick that up as a very young child, or was this something that came that you noticed later on in your life? So when did you start art?
That is a great question. I think perspective is very interesting because in my mind, I have always been making. But when I've had conversations with my parents, I think maybe some of that growing up was more a desire and intention internally than it was outward making. My father is a wonderful artist. I think some of you have gotten to see the work either in person or on the website. And I used to enjoy watching him work. And what I really enjoyed was just the way he lit up when he was working. I think I'm someone who, I won't say struggles with perfectionism, but I always wanted it to be right. And so a lot of my sketchbooks were empty growing up because I didn't want there to be mistakes in a book that someone could page through. I didn't want someone to be able to see all my mistakes. I wanted every page of a sketchbook to look amazing. And so I'd draw on bits of paper instead, or maybe I'd have one or two really good things in a sketchbook. But I really think I didn't quite have an appreciation growing up for how long it takes to develop a craft, that you can have talent, but it's really investing time and energy into your craft and that it develops and gets better over time. And so I think it was only in high school that I maybe got a bit of a better understanding of that and was really able to put more work in, because I would draw things and think that they didn't look good. And truly they weren't the strongest art pieces, but it just was because I hadn't gotten to draw enough. And so I think the one piece of advice that my wonderful art teacher, Prof. Mandumbwa, gave in class was you constantly need to be drawing, you constantly need to be refining your instrument, refining that skill and improving the craftsmanship. And it was when I had gotten to the end of high school and moved to the US and was at a community college that didn't have a very robust art program. They had summer classes that I really started to make work every opportunity that I had because I wanted the work to be better. So some of the other pieces that I have that aren't directly in this exhibition are digital artworks. And that really came out of a desire for me to be constantly making work and not always having the space or materials to do so. And so working digitally allowed me to really think about compositions and colors and brush shapes and lines and mark making, and constantly be trying things out, even if I didn't have the materials to do that outside of the classroom. And so I think I would say around 17 is where I really leaned in and got to invest a lot of time and energy into by making. And then I really kind of fell in love with painting in every sense, and in terms of what I could do with those materials when I was 18, 19. And I believe I met Miss Hearn shortly after my 20th birthday, if that provides some timeline, and I am now 24.
Thank you.
I see your dad Crawford is on the call. Please unmute yourself and say hello to everybody. I'm not putting you on the spot, but I do want to acknowledge your presence.
Good evening, everyone. By the way, I'm in Africa. It's late at night, so bear with me for saying good evening. Good afternoon, everyone.
Are there any particular questions you'd like to ask your daughter? Artist to artist, father to daughter?
Thank you for the question. Well, I think one statement that we've got in the catalog was that this whole exhibition was a pursuit of seeking answers on this issue of home and identity. Do you feel that in a way this does answer some of the questions? Thank you.
Thank you. I think at times I feel like when we have conversations, what we're looking for is resolution, and that there isn't always one specific answer. And so specifically, a sense of home is something that Dad and I have gotten to speak about. Even before I came here, we would speak about home and where home was for the both of us, and my ideas of home, my ideations of home. And the very first exhibition that I got to do with feeling represented people that were from home almost exclusively. Everybody in that show was someone that I knew specifically, or an image that represented a cultural archetype or an individual in my life. And when people asked about that show, I felt like I was able to say that if it takes a village to raise a child, that I had gotten to represent the village that had raised me in that room. And in some ways, I feel similarly because of the relational aspect of each of the pieces that we've gotten to make, that I've gotten to make. And so I think I've also arrived at a feeling, the longer that I have been here, that it's really relationships that allow me to feel at home. This isn't everybody that makes me feel at home. There are so many other people, wonderful individuals who I cannot thank enough for their support over the years. I spoke of a support system, and I would be remiss not to mention Jessica, Cody, Maddie, Lucy, and Josie Calhoun. They are my home away from home. They are my family. And so I think in many ways, just being able to have a show like this feels like it's arriving at a sense of resolution, because I'm really getting to sit back and think about my time, reflect on my time here in Arkansas, and think about that village that I spoke about when I initially had arrived here, and really getting to add to that village the people that have made me feel so welcome here. So I think we have arrived at a sense of resolution, but I also feel like the answer will continue to change over time. I'm looking at potentially going to graduate school. And so the next chapter of my life may not be in Central Arkansas. And so the individuals that would be represented in a show like this, were we to have the opportunity to do it again in 5 years, I think would evolve. And the ideas that I have around where home is for me would have evolved in that time as well. So I think for where we are now, this does feel like resolution to a degree. It does.
Thank you very much.
Are there any fellow artists that you're excited about their practices that inspire you, or even just going backwards, who are your artistic influences other than your dad, of course?
I think the first artist that I saw that really stopped me in my tracks, other than my dad, was a South African painter named Louise. And his works were these portraits and figurative pieces that were largely done in oil. But what really struck me about them was that he was painting African people in a way that felt very unapologetic, that it didn't feel like they were costumes or caricatures, but these were truly individuals that were alive and that he knew. And I think maybe for people that have lived here, that might be a little bit hard to understand. But outside of seeing my dad paint, I saw a lot of art in books, and they were European paintings. You know, it had Singer Sargent and Degas and Monet, and those were beautiful works. But the first time I saw work that moved me, that made me feel something, was seeing work that reflected people that looked like me, or that looked like people that I loved. And I thought to myself, I think in that moment, I think I was 14 when I came across that artist, I thought, if I make work, I want work to make people, I want that work to make people feel the way this is making me feel. And so something that I feel is deeply meaningful to me is when people walk into the exhibition and they stop and say, that looks like an uncle of mine, or that reminds me of a cousin. Because I remember that first feeling of seeing work that felt like it hit very close to home because of how it was representing in a very human way people that were important to me. So Louise Mkize is someone that remains on my list in terms of artists that I really enjoy. And then a more contemporary, more recent find in terms of artists that I enjoy would be, excuse me, Njideka Akumili Crosby. She's a Nigerian American painter who makes work that specifically deals with the idea of liminality, so being in and in between. Her work isn't just figurative, she also incorporates physical spaces in a way that is truly engaging. I don't think I can do her work justice in words, but I think listening to other artists speak is really interesting. And hearing her speak about her work, I really resonated with a lot of what she's thinking about conceptually with her work, which is how to represent this immigrant experience where you have one foot in each of these different spaces that you occupy culturally, and kind of treading that line and code switching culturally. I think the chief end of communication is to be understood. And so even thinking about the way that I speak to my sister and my cousins, and how I speak to people here, and how there's little things that you don't even think about, and how you change how you speak so that you are understood. So I think that's really important, or those two artists are really important. And then there are other artists that make work that is drastically different to my own, that I really enjoy and that I feel moved by. And I think that they're doing something that I hope to do in my practice. And one of those individuals would be Mark Bradford. He is a painter who works, I think, with a lot of paper as opposed to actual paint pigment. But there's something very emotive about what he does, specifically because he's pulling from the ephemera of the community. So rather than representing individuals in a more literal and direct way by using portraiture, he's pulling pieces of material from those communities, literal paper, and using that to inform his work. And so his work is still about people, just I think with a different mode and medium and process. And I think that there's something incredibly compelling in what he does, that I hope to continue to learn from. So there's many others, but I think those three definitely come to mind first.
Thank you so much. Well, I am going to invite your dad to come back and invite us all to the next programming for this show. I'll go ahead and put the slide up so everyone is aware. Or I don't know, Louise, if you want to talk about how people can see the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So the show Home Wherever the Soul Connects is available for viewing in full online. All the works are visible on Her and Fine Arts website. But also, if you are in the wonderful city of Little Rock and you have some time on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, there are actually one-on-one walkthroughs of the exhibition that can be scheduled. So that would just be getting to see the exhibition, have a little bit of insight about who the individuals that have been represented in the show are. So that's something that can be scheduled by either emailing or calling the gallery. And then the next artist talk that we have is on the 21st of November with Mr. Crawford Mandumbwa, which will also be over Zoom.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you will join us again in the future. Thank you so much, Louise, for that great presentation. Have a great Sunday afternoon, everyone.